After her once happy and loving son became angry and aggressive, a mother trusted her gut and hid a microphone in his backpack. When the principal heard the recording, the boys' teachers were immediately fired. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Daily Dose, like, and share this video with your friends. When parents send their children to school, they expect their teachers to care for their students like they were their own. That's why it was particularly horrifying for Melissa Davis, a loving mother, to learn that she had been offering up her child with special needs to his abusers each time she dropped him off for class. When 12-year-old Camden, who has been diagnosed with severe autism, began exhibiting abnormal behavioral changes, Melissa knew something must have happened to her son. The typically sweet and affectionate boy had become aggressive and began wetting the bed. The intuitive mother suspected that his sudden personality change had to do with school. Since Camden couldn't communicate what was wrong, Melissa came up with a plan to hide a recording device in the child's backpack, WBRZ reported. After Camden came home from school, Melissa listened to what had been recorded that day in his class at Hope Academy in Baton Rouge. What she heard confirmed her fears. The boy's two special needs teachers took turns berating, mocking, and abusing Melissa Davis's mentally disabled son in front of his entire class. "You're just writing the word. What is hard about it?" one of the teachers said in a frustrated tone. The boy tried to answer the teacher, but his words were unintelligible. The teacher mimicked the child's response, mocking his inability to speak clearly. She then pushed him further, asking, "Camden, why don't you have anything written down? That's why you can't sit with everyone. Tell your mama that." A teacher was also heard saying, "Let's see what they do with him in F. King Public School. He was going to go to Live Oak Middle. He wouldn't make it for a minute." Melissa was understandably angry and hurt by what she heard. Knowing she would have a fight ahead of her, she immediately pulled her son out of the school and hired an attorney. "I just wanted to cry, scream, and do everything I could because it was so bad," Melissa Davis said. "To think that I had sent my son there every day and what had happened before that I didn't know about." After Melissa released the recording to the public, the school acted quickly by firing the two teachers and publishing a statement, according to KTBS. The recording appears to be a compilation of audio clips, many of which involve private conversations between two adults with no other persons and children present. Hope Academy principal Linda Stone wrote, "The recording contains regretful conversations between these adults." The parent never brought the recording to the attention of Hope Academy before posting it to social media. The parent has also refused to meet with Hope Academy to discuss the actions we have taken to address the issue. The persons involved in the communications are either no longer with the school or will no longer be with the school after this semester. Although the principal alleged that the school was completely unaware of the situation, attorney Charlotte McGehee says her client had repeatedly brought her concerns to them only to be ignored. "She already had issues," McGehee said. "I would like to address where my son is seated, that my son has had a behavior change." None of those issues were addressed prior to her going and getting the evidence of abuse that was going on with her child. Melissa has since transferred Camden to a different school. However, she hopes that the Department of Education will implement a better protocol at Hope Academy to ensure that students, especially special needs children, are protected. After the transfer, Camden was reportedly doing well at his new school, but still having residual effects from the abuse that occurred at his old school. Only time will tell if he can fully overcome the trauma inflicted by the verbal and psychological abuse. Parents should be able to trust that their vulnerable children will not be abused by the educators that care for them. Disturbingly, these dangers are becoming more commonplace in the education system, making alternative schooling more appealing each day. Melissa's story is one that resonates deeply with parents, especially those of children with special needs. The bond between a parent and their child is filled with an instinctual drive to protect, nurture, and love. For Melissa, that bond was magnified due to Camden's vulnerability. The heartbreak she felt upon discovering the abuse was overwhelming. The trust she had placed in a system that was supposed to care for her child was shattered. The very people tasked with his education and well-being had turned into his tormentors. It wasn't just an abuse of power. It was a betrayal of the most profound kind. What was perhaps most chilling for Melissa was the realization that this abuse likely wasn't an isolated incident. How many days had her son endured this cruelty? How long had he been subjected to mockery and scorn by the very adults meant to support him? These were questions that no mother should have to ask, yet they weighed heavily on her mind. Each time Camden had come home, struggling to express himself, it was likely due to the torment he faced in the classroom. The guilt of not knowing sooner was crushing, but Melissa knew she had done the right thing by trusting her instincts and taking action. Melissa's decision to record her son's school day was a turning point, not just for Camden, but for many other children in similar situations. It was a bold move, but it highlighted an unfortunate reality. Sometimes parents must take matters into their own hands to protect their children. In a perfect world, schools would have systems in place to safeguard all students, especially those who are vulnerable. Yet in this instance, the school had failed Camden in every way. His teachers didn't see him as a child with potential, but as a burden, someone to be ridiculed instead of nurtured. The fallout from the recording was swift and severe. Public outrage grew as Melissa shared her story, and the school had no choice but to act. Firing the teachers was the least they could do, but it didn't erase the harm that had been done. Camden had been deeply traumatized, and the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. The school's statement, though quick to condemn the teachers, seemed to distance itself from responsibility. The principal's attempt to frame the recordings as private conversations between adults only added to the frustration. This wasn't about two teachers having an offhand discussion. This was about a child being bullied and mistreated. Melissa's attorney, Charlotte McGehee, made it clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. Melissa had raised concerns before, but the school had done nothing to address them. It was a classic case of neglect where red flags were ignored until undeniable evidence forced action. The fact that Melissa had to resort to secretly recording her son's day shows just how broken the system was. How many other parents had concerns but were too afraid or unsure of how to proceed? Camden's story shone a light on a much larger issue. Schools are meant to be safe havens for children, yet too often they become environments where the most vulnerable are overlooked, mistreated, or even abused. For special needs, children who may have difficulty communicating their experiences, the risks are even greater. Without proper oversight and training, educators can become the very people who perpetuate harm. Camden's case was a wake-up call for parents, educators, and policymakers alike. More needs to be done to protect children in classrooms, especially those who cannot speak up for themselves. Although Camden was now at a new school and adjusting well, the psychological damage was undeniable. Trauma doesn't simply vanish overnight. Each day at his old school had left invisible wounds, and it would take time for Camden to heal. Melissa remained hopeful, but she was also realistic. Her son had been through something no child should ever endure, and the road to recovery would be long. Still, with love and support, she believed Camden would eventually overcome the hardships he had faced. The ripple effects of Camden's story were far-reaching. Other parents of special needs children began to question their own situations. Were their children safe? Could they trust the educators responsible for their care? Melissa's brave decision to go public sparked conversations that had long been overdue. It wasn't just about Camden anymore. It was about the countless other children who, like him, may have been suffering in silence. Melissa's hope was that by sharing her story, she could prevent this from happening to other families. In the aftermath of the incident, the spotlight turned toward Hope Academy. Parents demanded answers, not just for Camden, but for the school's overall approach to handling special needs education. How could something like this happen in a specialized environment meant to support children like Camden? The academy had positioned itself as a place for students with unique needs, yet it had failed its most vulnerable. Calls for better training, stricter oversight, and more accountability grew louder as the community rallied behind Melissa and Camden. Ultimately, this story wasn't just about one mother and her son. It was about the importance of vigilance, advocacy, and never underestimating a parent's intuition. Melissa's determination to uncover the truth had brought justice for Camden, but it had also highlighted systemic issues within the education system. For too long, stories like Camden's had been brushed under the rug. Now, thanks to Melissa's courage, those stories were being heard. And while Camden's journey was far from over, one thing was clear: he was no longer alone.